As the sermon this morning, we're going to have some reflections on this church, on this body that we're all a part of and somewhat dependent on in one way or another. We seldom get a chance to think back through the period when this church kind of struggled, not that it's not struggling still, but where it really struggled to get going. Some individuals were not only there through all that period, but were the contributors to making this church stand the way it is today. So this morning we're going to hear from four of them. I'm not going to introduce them all. I'll let them say, because I don't know enough to introduce them. Let them each in turn, as they speak, say something about that Genesis and their role in the Genesis. Reverend Scotty Meeks will be first.
No, I'm first.
I
want to be first.
And I'm corrected. I misspoke. Dorothy Ward will be first. Then Lucy Tristle's words read by Marquis Deschamps, and then Mary Lynn Stroyer, and then Reverend Meeks. I'm checking now, make sure nobody else is in there. So we'll start though with Dorothy.
Thank you, Dave. Because several of our new people asked, how did the West Valley UU Church begin, that we created this service? In 1947, a gal named Frances, who lived in downtown Phoenix, I can't remember her last name, put an ad in the Phoenix newspaper inviting people interested in Unitarianism to meet her at the downtown YMCA. In 1955, when my husband and I were married in Phoenix, the group that started in 1947 had built a church at 8th Street, a block north of Camelback. Its congregation was larger than ours is now. In 1960, it moved to its current location on 40th Street and Lincoln Drive. In 1981, a member of the Phoenix Church, Muriel Osdor, was on the board of the Pacific Southwest District of the Unitarian Universalist Association that included California, Nevada, and Arizona. People on the board wanted to start more churches in the district. The board created a Southwest Extension Committee with Muriel as its chair. She was in charge of Arizona. She told me that she had a table-sized map showing where the Phoenix members lived. They found that a lot of people lived in the Glendale area and the Chandler area. Reverend Scotty Meek, who is here, worked with Muriel. In the spring of 1983, the Phoenix Church sent a letter to the people in the Glendale area inviting them to a member's home for a potluck to consider starting a UU church in Glendale. We had a few potlucks and created a steering committee. We decided to have our first service in December 1983 and invited people from the other churches to attend. 90 people came. The Sunday school was overwhelmed with children. Marika Deschamps will read Lucy Tristle's remembrance of how things were in 1984. Lucy, Mary Lynn Schroyer, and I are charter members of the West Valley. When Marika finishes Lucy's talk, Reverend Scotty Meek will tell about how we began, followed by Mary Lynn Schroyer.
Good morning. I'm Marika Deschamps. I joined this church right at about 21 years ago this month. When I joined the church, Lucy Trissel and I became acquainted, and soon we became friends. And I want to tell you what an honor and a privilege that has been. We've had so much fun together through the years. And I'm now going to read her history of the church as it began when they were organizing and she joined. We didn't attend our first organizational meeting because my husband's brother and his wife were visiting us for the Christmas holidays, and they were not UUs. But we did attend the first regular service, which was held at the Glendale Senior Center, located at 57th Avenue and Glen Drive. This was a very attractive building with a beautiful courtyard and a large auditorium with room for the service, and 3 smaller rooms in the back which were perfect for RE rooms. There were drawbacks, however. Each week the building had to be reserved for Sunday morning. Darnell Kirksey, who's here with us this morning, would rush down to the Glendale City Hall every Monday at 3:15 after teaching her classes at the elementary school to reserve the building for the following Sunday morning. It usually worked, but once in a while someone else would get there first, and we would be relegated to one of the smaller back rooms, and that was not as good. Dorothy Ward served as our first Sunday services chair. She served from January until June. In those early days, we adjourned for the hot summer months because many people left for the summer and attendance was sparse. When we resumed services in September of 1984, Darnell Kirksey became Sunday Services Chair and I joined her committee. I served on the Sunday Services Committee until this church year. That means I was on the committee for 28 years as a member, or occasionally as the chair. While we were at the Glendale Senior Center, Reverend Scotty Meek came to service as Extension Minister to help us get started. We're happy to have him here today. He was a tremendous help to us in many ways. He helped us organize committees and conduct our first fund drive. At first, we were called Valley del Sol Unitarian Universalist Society. Some of us didn't care for that highfalutin name. It was a little hard to say, and it was rather long, and it seemed a little pretentious. So we held a vote, and plain old West Valley UU Church won. We decided to use the word church instead of society or fellowship, thinking it might help us to grow. So far, it hasn't worked too well. We met at the Glendale Senior Center for only a year or so when the City Council changed its policy and decided that church groups could no longer use public buildings for services. I think it had something to do with separation of church and state. So we had to search for another meeting place, and we decided to move to the women's building, which was just down the street. It was an older building and not as attractive, but it had a large stage at one end of the auditorium where we introduced the West Valley Players in a few plays and other productions. But it had drawbacks too. The walls were very thin, and during the services we could hear the RE kids laughing and having fun. This was nice, but also disturbing for the adults who were trying to concentrate on the sermon. Also, we were not allowed to store anything there. Every Sunday after church, all the coffee things, the coffee pot, the cups, the napkins, sugar, creamer, cookies, and so on, as well as all the hymnals, had to be packed up and taken home with someone and brought back on the following Sunday. I don't remember who took the hymnals, but my husband and I packed up the coffee things and took them home with us. That was proving to be a real hassle, so once again we looked around for another place and decided to move to the Glendale YWCA on 61st Avenue, just a couple of blocks south of Olive. By then, we started calling ourselves the Wandering UUs. Counting our first organizational meeting, we have been in 6 different rented places until we found our permanent home here. During the summers when we weren't meeting for church, some of us missed our UU friends, and so we started meeting at 9 o'clock on Sunday mornings at the new Arrowhead Mall. We would meet in the food court, shove several tables together and have coffee and maybe a Cinnabon, and we would get caught up with each other. We called ourselves the Arrowhead UU Church. We soon discovered we were losing people to other churches in the summer. They would go to another church and then never come back to us. So we decided to have services all year round. The YWCA had all the facilities we needed, and we stayed there for several years. We had 3 part-time ministers while we were there: Reverend Albert King, Reverend Jim Norman, and Reverend Susan Mankerseal. Reverend Jim Norman divided his time between our church and the Chandler Church. We paid 1/3 of his salary, and the Chandler Church paid 2/3. So we got 1/3 of his time, and they got 2/3, and that worked out surprisingly well. When my husband died in the summer of 1989, Reverend Jim Norman officiated very beautifully at his memorial service. We had our circus while we were at the YWCA. Rod Morrison, one of our members, was a real circus buff. He worked at booking circuses all around the country, and he arranged for one to come to us as a fundraiser, and we would split the proceeds. The Culpeper and Merriweather Circus pitched their big tent on the parking lot of the YWCA. We all sold tickets to all our friends and neighbors, and it was a 1-ring circus with bleachers, but it had clowns, trapeze artists, acrobats, and trained animal acts. They even had a baby elephant, which was trained to do baby elephant tricks. And it was really pretty neat. I don't know how much money we made, but it sure was a lot of fun. Soon the YWCA started looking rather shabby, and so again, we started looking for a more attractive and inviting place. The Spirit of Hope Methodist Church on 75th Avenue was looking for a group to share their beautiful building. They evidently needed a little income at that time, so we started meeting there. We held our service on Sunday after theirs. We had 2 part-time ministers while we were there, Reverend Joyce Smith and Reverend Peter Lanzalotta. We loved it there at the Methodist Church, but after a while their congregation began to grow and they needed the space. Some of their congregation didn't like having to clear out of their building right after their service so that we could have ours. The Methodist minister was very nice and apologetic, but he asked us to leave, and we felt evicted. It was decided it was time to stop being the wandering UUs and find our own promised land. A lady by the name of Halusha Witowski, one of our members, was a teacher at Sign Elementary School. She arranged for us to use their music room for our meetings temporarily until we could settle into a place of our own. While we were at Sign School, Linda Bunyard was our part-time minister. This corner of 59th Avenue in Cholla was for sale, and we really coveted this spot. But it was also completely out of our price range. So we settled on a piece of land close to Grand Avenue and 75th Avenue. It was not ideal, but it was all that we could afford. We dedicated that plot of land. We gathered there with drums and whistles and marched around the perimeter, beating our percussion instruments and singing. Anyone watching us probably thought we were some kind of weird cult. But then, hallelujah, a UU miracle happened. The woman who had bought this land found out that it was not zoned for what she had bought it, a wedding chapel. She talked to her real estate agent, who was also our agent, and asked if we could be persuaded to trade with her, even Stephen. Well, that was an offer we could not refuse. We traded, and we really got the best of that deal. And so, here we are. And as far as I know, there's still no wedding chapel on Grand Avenue.
Well, when I first came here, I was 30 years younger, 30 pounds lighter, and had dark hair. I could see, and I could hear, and I could remember. None of which is true any longer. But I would remind you that Moses traveled with his band of people through the desert for 40 years before he settled down. So you still got a ways to go. 1984, we drove into Glendale for the first time in June of that year, looking for a place to live. We had been living in Tempe at the time. And we came to the Glendale city line and saw the sign that said, "Welcome to Glendale, population 100,000. In August of 1984, we had made arrangements to live in a brand new apartment building at the junction of Northern and 51st. And as we drove in to take claim of our new apartment, we passed the Glendale city line, and it said, "Welcome to Glendale, population 120,000. And in just 2 short months, the population of Glendale had increased 20,000 people. I don't think there were more than 3 of them who were Unitarian Universalists. We settled in very happily and began almost immediately looking for a home because, as was just mentioned in Lucy's history, we weren't using borrowed facilities. It happened that there was a small Baptist church in downtown Glendale on the market. And the price was right, I thought. And we went and looked at it and noticed that there was a baptismal tank in front of the sanctuary, which I thought would make a great hot tub. Except it was pointed out that there was no hot water in the building. But it turned out that the biggest drawback to that facility was the fact that it had absolutely no off-street parking. And you know what that would have meant for a congregation meeting on Sunday morning. So we bypassed that, and we continued on in rented quarters. I think we only moved twice during the time that I was here. But I have visited you over the years in several of your quarters. I think that this is by far the finest facility that you had over the years, and I commend you on the industry that you've shown in maintaining it as well as you have. I think there's only 3 original members left. Is that right, Dorothy?
Right.
Right. Yes.
Tell us how you got from Wisconsin to Arizona.
I'm sorry?
Tell us how you got from Wisconsin to Arizona.
From Wisconsin to Arizona? From Minnesota to Arizona. Yeah, Wisconsin came later. um, yeah, I had been in Rochester, Minnesota for something close to 10 years, serving the church in that area, which is where I got to know Lisa Cook, by the way. And Lisa and Dorothy and I all shared the same wedding anniversary. Yeah, my Dorothy. Well, our Dorothy, whatever. And but you know, I was in my 50s, and it was a question whether I was going to try to stay in Rochester until I retired, or whether I should move while I still had some marketable skills, or so I thought. And so I contacted the Department of the Ministry at the UUA, and they said, well, there was a job opening on the West Coast for an extension minister. And the settlement director thought that I had the kind of experiences that would lend itself to that kind of employment. I was a New Englander by birth, and then we had spent 10 years in Minnesota, and I didn't know about coming all the way to the West Coast. I was kind of scared of the image that I had of California congregations. But at any rate, I decided that I would at least try to interview for the job. So I said, okay, send my name in. And one day I got a call from someone whom I had known from Perry Star District, who said, congratulations. And I said, for what? And he said, you're our new extension minister. And I said, what? I haven't, all I did was allow my name to be sent out. I haven't seen any information about the job, or haven't had an interview with anybody. And he said, well, we don't need that. I know you. And I told them you'd be good. And I said, well, I'm sorry, Bob, but I need more than that. So we finally arranged an interview. I flew out to California, went through the interview, and they said, okay, you're hired. And we guarantee the job for 2 years. Because at that point, they had no money. They just had the prospect of having this position, which would have me as the extension minister spending 6 months with 2 congregations each year, and which meant becoming nomads. Fortunately, our children were grown at that point, and my Dorothy, said, well, let's give it a shot. So we agreed to come. And we in fact did serve as nomads. We lived in Laguna Hills, California for 6 months, and then came over here to the Valley to work with the Valley congregation. We lived in Tempe for 6 months, and then we came over here. And that's how it all started. And the 2 years extended to 4. And then when that ended, we moved into interim ministries, which we did for another 20 years, and then finally retired to Sun Lakes, which was a place that we had found while we were here, actually. And I was invited, when we were in Tempe, I had been invited to speak at the chapel at Sun Lakes, and which I did, and I immediately fell in love with the place. but figured we couldn't afford to live there, so we didn't do anything about that. But when we were here, the real estate agent that we had talked with while we were in Tempe, called and said there's a new place that just come on the market I think you might be interested in. And so we went from here down to Sun Lakes one Saturday and looked at it and immediately bought it. And it's been our home ever since. So that's the story of our perambulations. I don't know if anybody has any questions that they might want to ask. You know, I share with several of the members of this congregation an eye problem, and I have macular degeneration, which makes it almost impossible for me to prepare anything in advance. So anything I do has to be sort of extemporaneous. So if you have any questions, if I can see your hands, I'll be glad to try and answer them.
Any questions? I have my glasses. I think your explanation, history was pretty good.
Okay, well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you again after all these years.
Okay, so,
So do you still want 9 more words with?
oh, I do. It was out of order, that's all.
I'm Marilyn Troyer. I was one of the charter members. And I don't know how it came to pass, but the first thing I remember is that I was committed to be responsible for the program once a month for 6 months. And so I had to find a speaker, did the music, put it all together. Darnell and I worked a lot together. And it was fun to do. Previous to my coming to Phoenix, I belonged to a UU fellowship in Dayton, and one of the things I loved about it was the variety of everything. One week the chairs would be facing north, the next week south, third week in a circle. The offertory might be second, it might be next to the last, and so I just thrived on that variety. I came here and especially where I was going as a other church, it was just regimented, same way. So I had to declare my independence and would once in a while say, we're not even doing lighting the chalice today, just to change it a little bit. So, and I did my thoughts on this a little bit differently, I think, than what Dorothy had in mind, but I was looking at this as what were some of the outstanding things that I remember during our last 30 years. And one of the things that I remember that I thought was just a kick, and if anybody remembers her last name, I'm horrible in names. Her first name was Diane, and she was our choir director and music program. Case, that's right. And Lucy was in the choir. You should have heard her beautiful bass voice, and we practiced in my house frequently. And one Easter, and I don't know if it was 1984 or when it was, but we had a beautiful outdoor area, and the church at that time had a keyboard, and Diane had a keyboard. So we set one up for organ, one for piano, and Diane and I played piano and organ duets Easter Sunday outside. And it was a service I really liked, and it was fun to put together. So the other thing that I remember, and again, I'm terrible with names, but we had a young woman who, as I recall, she played the trumpet. And she was a member of a brass quartet. And boy, did we have music. Those 4 were professional musicians, frequently played that quartet for us. And it was just a joy. Anybody remember who that was? Yeah, I can picture their faces, but I can't remember their names. One of the things that is most outstanding to me about the last 30 years are the people who have passed through this church. And we still have, obviously, wonderful, wonderful people who still come here. But boy, if we had all that, that whole gang, be something else. But there was a couple that had a Christmas Eve, well, not Christmas Eve, close to Christmas Eve party every year, and would make homemade chili, and we would gather, and then we would all go Christmas caroling around their neighborhood. And that was really fun. They were a great couple. They were very active for many, many years. So Let's see, was there anything else? I think that was basically it. I remember one service I did, which was a kick. That Dorothy had reminded me of it, and I'd forgotten about it. I had a friend who was a Toastmaster and had gone to one of his contests and heard two other Toastmasters plus him that had really meaningful talks that they gave. So that was one of our services, and they were good too. So anyway, it's been a wonderful 30 years. I hope that we can retain the wonderful people we have now, and I hope we have some more come back like we did today. It'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, so now comes the irregular part of the service. I'm going to do something that's not in this, if you don't mind. One of the critical things about churches that are small, like this, is to find speakers, especially when we don't have a regular minister, and people who come here and are appreciated. One of the most important things for a speaker to have is people in the first 2 rows. And coincidentally, the people in the first 2 rows are probably not known by many of you because you only see the backs of their heads. So just both as a means of appreciation of those people and as a way of kind of getting some interaction from our group, I'd like the people in the first 2 rows to stand if they can, but just turn around and face the other people and tell your name so they'll know who you are. Let's start right over there.
I'm Mary Lou Cornell.
Hi, Mary Lou.
Marika Bishop.
How are you doing? Thank you. Dorothy? And Dorothy's responsible for the service today in those parts. So
Hi, Dorothy.
exactly what happens. Yes.
Diane Snyder.
Erica Ferguson. I haven't been here for a long time, and I sat up front.
Good.
Darnell Kirksey.
Barbara Kovacs.
Lucy Trissel. Dorothy Meek.
Okay, then, part 2. I'm a professor, and I have the seating problem all the time because students like to think that they can escape what's going on by sitting in the back. So I'm going to come back here and ask the last 2 rows to introduce themselves. Starting right over there.
I'm Susie Howell. I'm Heidi Bogue.
Introduce yourself, please.
Ariel McReynolds.
Hi, Aaron.
There you go. Welcome.
Diana Barker, we relate.
Rose Calante.
Doris Becker.
Hi, Doris. You there?
Brian Chapman and Dion Chapman.
Hi. Welcome. Yes.
Louise Slaughter.
Jennifer Kaiser.
Wayne Daniel, and I'm always in the back.
I'm Glenn Snyder, and I'm always late.
And I'm Lisa Cook, but I usually sit up in the
Here you go. Something.
I'm Gina Martinez with 2 boys, and that's why we stay in the back.
There's some good excuses.
Now
Now
let's
it's the
introduce everybody in the
responsibility of the
middle.
rest of you in the middle to go now and introduce yourselves to those people. You all talk to some one person and get to know each other. All right, now we're down to the closing hymn, number 114, Forward Through the Ages. Please stand if you are able and willing.
Different measure
Please join me in the unison reading of the West Valley Mission Statement, stated at the bottom of your program. This church provides a safe place to celebrate diversity, draw inspiration for our lives, foster social and environmental justice, and compassionately support each other in our spiritual services. Thank you all for attending today. I hope you've learned a little bit about how this church came to be and how this congregation came to be, and something about who are the people that make it go every week. A very critical task that we all appreciate, and thank all of you for the work that you do. Thank you, and good morning.
Marty, say that.